Hey everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations. So today's video, I'm going to be exploring this new moon in Virgo. And what I want to do is give you some insight, some perspective, and hopefully have you walk away from this video with a little bit more clarity about, why you might be feeling the way that you're feeling or orientated towards a certain perspective at the moment. And maybe giving us a little bit more deeper insight into what is actually taking place within the collective at the moment. So to me, I feel that this chart over here is really, really busy. There is so much going on. There are so many details and layers to this astrology chart that I feel that if we don't really extract it, the different parts and synthesize them together, there's an opportunity that I feel would be missed in terms of seeing the brilliance of the current configuration at the moment. Like I just took one look at it, sat with it for a while, wrote some notes down, and it's very evident that there is one very strong thread that is coming out of this chart, but you don't see it until you see the other moving parts. So that's what I want to try to synthesize with everybody today. And I think we'll just jump straight into it. So let's go over to the chart. There we go. And just move this over to the side. So this is the chart of the new moon, and this was happening at 3:55 in the morning here in Sweden. Okay. So there's lots to say, right? There's this Pluto that's retrograded back into Capricorn. That's significant. It won't be going back into Capricorn again for as long as we are living on this planet. So this is the last time that we're going to see Pluto in Capricorn. Okay? From when it turns direct in November, that's it. It's done. All right? We're never going to see it back in Capricorn again. Which is kind of like a little bit weird in one way, it's saying that, right? I tend to move towards the nostalgic way of things. And so while I might not necessarily feel nostalgic towards the things that Pluto and Capricorn brought us, there's a part of me that feels like, oh, okay, that's it, right? It's gonna go. Either way, that's part of my own personal work with Pluto retrograding into Capricorn. But we've got Pluto retrograding into Capricorn, and on this new moon, it makes this inconjunct to Mars, right? So it's called an inconjunct, a little table person over there. So for those of you that are new to astrology, I'll break this down. But what this essentially means is that this relationship between these two planets, they can't really see each other. And because they can't see each other, we often find ourselves in dilemmas where the lack of information causes a dilemma. And then it's only later afterwards when the information arises through a conversation or insight, or some new information comes into our field about the situation, do we go, okay, I wish I'd known that then, or, would have helped if I understood that. And oftentimes an inconjunct forces a necessity for a crisis, and that crisis brings us into deeper contemplation. That's really what that inconjunct does. We tend to, through that crisis, feel, or it forces us into contemplation. So here you've got this angle over here between these two. Then you have Pluto squaring Chiron. And if you follow evolutionary astrology, you'll know that the planet Mars is associated with Aries. And Aries then Mars is basically telling us exactly what Aries is doing. So you would read it like this. You would go, okay, Mars is the planetary ruler of Chiron. So if you want to understand Mars and Chiron as a sort of symbolism, it's good to put those two together. So right now, there is a collective story around the way that we communicate, the language that we use, the narratives, the myths that we utilize to validate deeper emotional positions that we take on reality. And again, I'll break that down. So that's how you would synthesize that stuff. So Pluto retrograding back into Capricorn, making this inconjunct to Mars, squaring Chiron is a big deal. Right? Pluto is always a big deal, and it's hitting important planets. It's also trining the south node. And in this case over here, Pluto to the south node says, what are we ready to let go of? What are we ready to move beyond? So that's the first piece here, right? It's what are we ready to move beyond or move forward from? What am I not seeing as part of my narrative that's reinforcing my lack of agency in this situation. Okay. The reinforcing the lack of agency is the Chiron piece, right? To me, if you've been following my work for a long time, you'll know that I've been advocating a tremendous amount towards Chiron as revealing to us that if we are to move through the emotional debris that we carry within us around past experiences that have impacted us, and we don't address where we've shut down or where you've internalized a lack of your capacity to re-emerge into your life with freedom and possibility and option, as opposed to feeling oppressed and repressed and stuck, right? That's the binary with Chiron. So it's all about reclaiming agency in my eyes. And if you speak to a lot of people who have actually got Chiron in Aries at the moment, like that's what they were born with, you'll find that a tremendous amount of their current work, and for those of you that have got this, that a large part of it is actually rediscovering your own sense of direction and your own sense of destiny and your own sense of like, I have freedom now to kind of make choices for myself that feels more aligned with who I truly am. Yeah. So this Chiron over here, this agency dynamic. So Gemini, Mars, really coming exploring where narratives, where stories that I might hold about my experiences are either reinforcing my lack of agency, or I'm learning about ways to think about my life that are agency focused. Like, how can I improve my agency? What can I strengthen within myself? Where am I able to recognize that if something is pulling me back or holding me down, to address it, and then to find new stories that are empowering, right? So that's that relationship between the two over there in those dynamics. When we step into that position, or when you step into that kind of way of thinking, it immediately brings into focus this relationship here between the South Node and Venus. So the Venus piece is, we've been working, like the energy speaks to where we carry the principle of equilibrium or balance within ourselves. Libra is a funny archetype in the sense that we can go from extremes of just high independence to the other extreme, which is complete sort of dependence, right? The lack of agency. And so many of you are probably feeling that pull between sort of, I want to step out and do something independently, but that feels weird. And then the other part that says, well, I'm clinging to the old because it feels familiar and I can relate to my life this way, but it doesn't feel like it's growing. It doesn't feel like it feels stagnant. So this Venus on the South Node, in my eyes, is bringing to attention where that inner relationship with ourselves might still be in balance, where we're still fighting between the recognition that you are looking to make choices in your life that are forward movement. Like, here's where I'm ready to take a step in a direction that feels completely weird and uncomfortable, but I know that this is a new path for me, right? A new pattern, a new way of being, a new way of responding, a new set of choices that you feel are right for you to make. So Venus on the South Node, in my eyes, in relationship to Pluto, and Pluto being in Capricorn now, is we're at a point where Pluto asks, is there anything else that you feel is holding you back emotionally that you haven't uncovered yet? Yeah. And Venus says, well, yes, there is this piece over here that I've been carrying with me that needs to kind of be addressed, worked on, or strengthened, or let go of, right? Whatever that might be. And when Pluto and Chiron and Pluto and Venus have this conversation with each other, and you feel that impulse to say, yes, this is what I feel needs to change, or this is where a new opportunity for growth takes place, that will then bring into question the Chiron dynamic. Now, the Chiron-Pluto relationship here is an ongoing long-term transit. So these planetary systems are not going to be sort of touching each other and then that's it, right? This is a long-term thing. So the kind of context or the perspective or the grounding of this Pluto-Chiron is Chiron saying to Pluto, hey, how can we begin to address these underlying sensitivities and wounds that we carry from where the collective has been? So an example of what I could mean by that is, let's say, for instance, for a long period of time, the laws said that, nobody was allowed to smoke marijuana, okay? Which was the truth, right? And at the time, and this is a silly example, but it gets the point across. And at the time, the consequences for crossing this law, right, meant that you went to jail. Okay. Now, the effect and the consequence of those laws, so if you cross those boundaries, Pluto and Capricorn, at the time when that law was standing in place, that had an emotional impact and emotional effect, right, on, say, a person. And then let's fast forward 30 years later and we rechange the laws and we say, actually, you know what, we've thought about this and we're like, we're going to change this and say you don't have to go to jail. We can legalize a certain amount. The wound, Chiron, is still is represented by the impact that that person had gone through because the laws at that time said this, and now they've changed it. You can't go to this person and say, well, you can get your life back. You can't. So there's always going to be an underlying emotional response or an emotional impact of the past that we're carrying with us. And Chiron square Pluto is the conversation around not neglecting the fact that these things are here on an individual and collective level, but it is also recognizing that if we are to move forward and liberate ourselves, this is the Uranus, Mercury, and Jupiter context. Here you see Jupiter wherever Jupiter is. Why is Jupiter not showing up? There you are, Jupiter. Right, sorry, the Jupiter-Saturn, that's what I meant. The Jupiter-Saturn square is where I see the potential for the conversation between Pluto and Chiron to be unlocked. So what I'm trying to say here is that Pluto-Chiron is like, we can't undo the past experiences. What we can do is begin to work towards reconciliation. We can work towards kind of addressing those underlying experiences, understand the consequences from them and how it's impacted, and then begin to address experiences moving forward where there's some form of reconciliation. And so in my case, as an example, it would be like, okay, as a child, I was exposed to a parent who, and for many of you experience this if you were raised in the 90s and 80s, the parent would sort of, if you broke something or did something wrong, they would kind of like get angry with you in a way where you didn't understand why it was so extreme. And so for me, within my nervous system, I carry with myself, right, this kind of sensitivity towards this internal parent potentially saying, bad, doing this, etc. Today, I can't, the event is not the same, right? But my body can interpret the potential. I can carry that anxiety in me. So I can see back at the consequences of what it was like to parent children and how much unresolved trauma parents carried. But if you think forward, how can you make empowering choices in this moment to reorientate yourself to say, okay, well, this has happened. These are the effects. Here's how it can move forward. Now, in my case, and in most of your cases, a lot of those emotional experiences can be addressed by the perspective I'm offering. But if you draw this to a more deeper complex, like for instance, the Palestine and Israel conflict and the underlying emotional dynamics that are existing there and the players that are involved in a conflict like that. If you look at the Ukraine and Russia dynamic, these are emotional memories that are not just on the surface. This conflict didn't arise just out of thin air. It arose because for a long period of time, there's a history of unresolved, very unfair dynamics that have taken place that have left people completely hurt and wounded and affected. And of course, there are going to be responses towards the opposition like that. So on a global scale, this is an invitation for humanity to try to see if there's ways of resolving it. I don't know. But there are people that are internally emotionally responding to the recognition that there needs to be a new way. It's the same with the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. I'm just highlighting these two because that's what the Western media kind of puts across. But there are many conflicts across the world in many situations, whether it just be between yourself and an ex-partner, between yourself and a mother, between, as I said, nations. The dynamic is there. That is what Pluto-Chiron square is about. And Chiron is desperately saying that we have to both acknowledge the woundedness, but we have to also recognize that it will just keep on replicating destruction if there is no sort of liberation from the wounding, right? If we stay in that wounding and you get stuck in it, it will just completely create destruction. So Pluto in Chiron relationship is not a this is not a transit that I think we should take lightly, and I definitely do not think that this transit should in any way be sort of brushed off as something simple like, oh, disempowerment and Chiron wants the wounded healer. This transit, in my eyes, if you feel it deeply in your body, if you just go to a part of yourself that has been wounded by an experience, and you try to elicit some form of forgiveness or some form of compassion or some form of like a sense of wanting to try and create resolution, but you're not there yet, and there's lots of hurt feelings, like it doesn't just go away over a second, right? So this transit is a big deal, and to me, I feel it's going to shape a tremendous amount of the way that we are going to see the world move. These transits right now, with this new moon happening at 11 degrees, to me is a clear indication that the resolution for us individually, so if you kind of just bring it back to your home local area and your own emotional dynamics and how you can kind of address narratives and stories that need to be grieved, right? To go through some form of acceptance and grieving process. By the way, that's a Virgo story. Lots of us talk about Virgo as perfection, all of these things. Those are complexes. Virgo is about the process of coming into the realization that life itself is inherently about suffering in many ways, that things will not go our way, that we do live in a world of tragedy. We live in a world where what is real is that if you are a farmer and you ideally want your crops to grow and you have a bad sort of season and the crops don't grow as much as you need to and you get affected by the lack of food, Virgo's like, that happens, but ideally we don't want it that way. So when you've got a new moon in Virgo and it makes an aspect to Saturn and Jupiter, and this is the piece that I'll kind of break down for us. When you've got this new moon highlights in my eyes the Saturn-Jupiter complex, which again has to do with the way that society, Saturn and Jupiter, its philosophies are merged together. And when Saturn is moving through Pisces in a deep state of revelation around where things have decayed, right, where things have been hurt, where things have been left too long and have become broken apart, Jupiter's inviting us to say, okay, well, we have to re-envision a new way of being individually. So how can you take a dynamic that's within you and see what narrative you might use that reinforces still this empowerment or some form of like sacrifice perspective that you have? And what can you do to go on a journey to begin to heal those underlying emotional patterns and strengthen your inner world so that when Pluto and Chiron continue to keep making this aspect with each other, you're benefiting from stepping into a more empowered version of yourself or a more healed version of yourself. And that can look like simply just waking up and deciding, you know what, I'm not going to sleep at the time that I should. I'm waking up in the morning, I'm not feeling good about myself, and I need to address that pattern. And then you make a decision, right? This is what's good for me on an individual level. I think the collective will do what the collective does. But on an individual level, it's about making new choices where you know that patterns could be holding you back or not being in it's like benefit to you. And this new moon speaks to the process of coming really into the grief of these experiences that we've had and the story that we carry around it, right? Oftentimes when we're stuck in grief, it's because we're processing through the emotions, and sometimes processing takes time, and sometimes it means acknowledging that we might still want to hold on to the past. So a big part of the Saturn in opposition to Neptune is where do you might still hold on to the nostalgia of experiences when in actual fact this is a time to ready to move on. And that's what I think Pluto retrograde into Capricorn is. It's time to move on from the narrative of Pluto and Capricorn and move into Pluto and Aquarius and to begin to break far away from this deep entrenched emotional material that has sort of been the playground for us for a long period of time, and start seeing yourself as somebody that can participate in life rather than being overwhelmed by overwhelmed by life, because at the end of the day, like, you have a choice for most of us within the container. Like, I mean, I can't this doesn't apply to the people in Palestine at the moment and in Israel, but in war places like that. The so but on an individual level, what is it that you can do in your most immediate environment that could shift something that consistently keeps improving your well-being in some way, shape, or form? And that's really the kind of message here with this new moon in Virgo. It's like setting the stage, ready to move from and grow beyond, and accept the experiences that have happened. And then from that moment where you're right now, say, okay, well, what can I do moving forward? So that's the video. That's the energy of this new moon from my perspective, at least. I hope that this lands for you. You can always give me some thoughts in the comment section. Of course, that would be great. And for those of you that missed the previous video that I did, where I talked about books that have influenced my astrology practice, you'll see that there is a link, or like a little thing that's going to come up now. You can click on that and watch that.